This is the Conservative American Message, hosted by the one and only Cam Lau. It is Monday, September 25th, 2023, and you can join me every week for the greatest political commentary known to man. Famed Austrian economist Friedrich Hayek said, "It cannot be stressed enough that the coercion which unions have been permitted to exercise contrary to all principles of freedom under the law is primarily the coercion of fellow workers." The poll numbers that I shared with you guys last week were based on registered Republicans across the country. But I think this week we should look specifically at the polling among Republicans in Iowa alone, because we're seeing a little bit of a different picture. Iowa specifically is super important because the Iowa caucuses are the very first primary event to take place in any presidential year. Whomever comes out on top in Iowa will likely influence every primary election that comes after. Of course, Donald Trump still remains in first place, but by a slightly narrower margin than across the whole country. He's currently polling in Iowa at 46%, with Ron DeSantis behind by 31 points at 15%. But in third, surprisingly to me, Nikki Haley has managed to get to double digits at 11%. She may not be as irrelevant as we had once assumed. Vivek Ramaswamy nationally has been rising in the polls, but among Iowans, he's only at 7%, tied at 7% with Tim Scott. I have to say that Nikki and Tim have surprised me a bit in that regard, but still ultimately I think this is Trump's game, and the only one with half a chance of beating Trump is DeSantis. However, these 5 candidates are the most serious, and in my opinion, the best out of all of the GOP politicians that have thrown their hat in the ring for 2024. But hey, we haven't even talked about the Democrats yet. You may be thinking that Joe Biden has it all locked up. And essentially, he probably does. Nationally, he's polling about 65%. But we can't totally write off Robert Kennedy Jr. He's at 15% right now, nationally. But I think what Kennedy needs to do is convince independents to register as Democrats and go primary for him so that Biden can't count on the liberal establishment to automatically nominate him for the presidency. Kennedy would be a bad president, but he wouldn't be a terrible president. I disagree with so much of what he stands for and believes in, but I will say that on foreign policy, he would be the first president since his uncle JFK that didn't want to be in a constant state of war with America going around the whole globe policing every corner of it. He's much more concerned with protecting American interests domestically. And no matter how crazy he gets on his social issues or climate issues, it can't be as bad as what we got now. If you haven't heard of DuckDuckGo, it's basically a search engine that claims, unlike Google, that they do not collect your data for advertisements, and they provide unbiased search results. Google is currently under scrutiny for antitrust allegations, which means for being a monopoly, which they are. They have pushed all the competition out by striking deals with companies like Apple or Verizon to make Google the default search engine across all devices. The CEO of DuckDuckGo, Gabriel Weinberg, testified against Google before the Department of Justice. This is a huge issue because we also have evidence that Google influences elections by the search results that they promote. If one company is given that ultimate power to be the source of information for 99.99% of the population, you can see how problems will begin to occur even more often. Whether or not Google will be subjected to antitrust regulation is unknown, but it will certainly set a precedent for other big tech companies that continue to grow while smothering out competition. Preventing monopolies is honestly one of the only ways that the government should be regulating business. Without monopoly, capitalism typically works itself out in the marketplace through competition. But how can we expect the government to make wise decisions for the private sector when they can't even handle their own financials? The government is going to shut down by October 1st if they can't come to an agreement on the federal budget. Hardline conservatives are demanding that big-time cuts be made from a multitude of pointless government agencies. And I think this is exactly the extreme type of action that congressional Republicans need to be doing. The left has used far more extreme measures for far more extreme policies. If this is what it takes just to sprinkle a dash of fiscal responsibility into the federal government, then I'm all here for it. This is your weekly reminder to follow and subscribe to the Conservative American Message on Instagram, Facebook, Threads, X, Truth Social, Spotify, YouTube, Apple, and everywhere else, except TikTok. We're not there. And please share this episode with all your friends so we can keep making sure to offend everyone. The United Auto Workers have gone on strike against the three major U.S. auto manufacturers, Ford, GM, and Stellantis, who's responsible for brands like Chrysler, Jeep, and Dodge. The union is demanding a 36% pay increase, a 4-day, 32-hour work week, health care for retirees, among a bunch of other ridiculous items. They were countered by Stellantis for a 21% increase in pay, but the union president shot down that right away. I think that they're being absolutely ridiculous with these demands. And unions in general are ridiculous, guys. I mean, it might have made sense back 150 years ago when laborers were treated like slaves with no rights, but there's so much legislation protecting workers' rights these days, it isn't necessary for the union to fight for the workers' rights. The only purpose that they have today is to suck the dues out of their members in order to make a bunch of lawyers rich. Unions might be able to collectively bargain and get good deals for their workers in the past, but today we're in a global economy, and if these unions push too hard, those jobs will easily be sent out of this country where labor is far cheaper and far less regulated. The CEOs of these auto companies have the job to create the most profit that they can. If your job on the factory line can be done by a Mexican or a Chinese worker for half the price, then you're just darn lucky that you're making the wage you do and that they kept that job in this country. And don't even start complaining about how much the CEO of a company makes. He's the friggin' CEO. That's not an easy job to do, or to acquire for that matter. If you want to make that kind of money, then go get the education and work towards that. Otherwise, just quit your griping. Do I think it's a good thing to ship American jobs overseas? Of course not. But this is reality, and businesses have to make wise and profitable decisions. Patriotism can only go so far, especially when it comes to a publicly traded corporation. I mean, George Bush was so patriotic that in order to keep the jobs here in 2008, when Chrysler and GM went belly up, he bailed them out with your tax dollars. And that's what's inevitably going to happen again. If these unions continue to push this asinine agenda, the American workforce is going to lose these jobs to a foreign country, or the government will have to step in and artificially prop them up with your tax dollars. It's not like these workers aren't getting paid decently to begin with. The average auto worker in manufacturing in the United States makes $28 an hour. Only about $1,000 less than the average salary in the United States. So could they stand to make a little bit more money? Sure, but 36%? That's a $20,000 per year increase on average. That's a bit steep if you ask me. In an interview on CBS, one union member claimed that they could make more money working in fast food. And to that, I say go ahead. Go flip burgers at McDonald's. Everyone wants to hate on it, but if the money is supposedly there, then go do it. But when you quit living in La La Land and you realize that Mickey D's ain't paying no $70,000, although they are double the minimum wage, but that's a different discussion. Of course, Joe Biden is a pro-union kind of guy, and he fully supports this strike, right along with the communists like Bernie Sanders. But if you ask me, this strike will do nothing but negatively impact the economy and America's auto industry. Well, that's all I have time for. Were you offended by this podcast? Good. Thanks for listening, guys. I really appreciate you all. Have a great week and stay conservative.